The room was quiet except for the sound of Marcus's shaky breathing. He clutched the phone tightly, his small hands trembling as he tried to stay calm. On the couch in front of him lay his mother, Sarah, her face pale and her body motionless. Just moments ago she had been laughing with him about the dinner they planned to cook together. But then, without warning, she doubled over in pain and collapsed. Now all Marcus could do was stare at her, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He knew something was terribly wrong. His mom was 7 months pregnant, and this wasn't normal. She needed help, fast. With no one else around, Marcus took a deep breath and dialed 911. As the line rang, he whispered to himself, "Please pick up. Please." Finally, someone answered. 911, what's your emergency? Came a sharp voice on the other end. It belonged to Linda Harper, a seasoned operator who had handled thousands of calls during her career. But tonight, there was something different in her tone, something cold and impatient. "My mom, she's really sick," Marcus stammered, tears choking his voice. "She fell down and now she won't wake up. And she's pregnant." Linda sighed audibly. "How old are you?" she asked, not bothering to hide her irritation. "I'm 12, Marcus replied quickly. "But my mom, she's really hurt. You have to send someone." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Linda spoke again, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Are you sure it's an emergency? People call us for headaches and stubbed toes all the time. Are you just scared because she fainted?" "No," Marcus insisted, his voice rising. "She's not waking up. Please, you have to help her." Linda interrupted him sharply. "Listen, kid, we get prank calls from your neighborhood all the time. If this is real, someone will come check it out. But don't waste our time if it's nothing serious." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. For a moment, Marcus sat frozen, staring at the phone in disbelief. Had she really hung up on him? Was no one coming to help? The silence in the room felt suffocating. He glanced at his mom, still lying so still on the couch, and panic surged through him again. He couldn't just sit there and wait. What if she didn't make it? Tears streamed down his face as he thought about what to do next. He remembered watching videos online about first aid and how to handle emergencies. Maybe he could try to help her until someone arrived. Grabbing a towel and some water bottles from the kitchen, he knelt beside his mom and gently dabbed her forehead, whispering words of encouragement even though he wasn't sure she could hear him. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus began to feel more alone than ever. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his young shoulders. If no one else would step up, he realized, he would have to be the one to save his mom and the baby she carried. Little did he know, his bravery was about to inspire others in ways he couldn't imagine. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to think of what to do next. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of his chest. He looked at his mom again, her face still pale and lifeless, and whispered, "I'm not going to let you go. I promise." Though he didn't know much about medical emergencies, he remembered bits and pieces from videos he'd seen online, how to check if someone was breathing, how to keep them comfortable, and even some basics about childbirth. But none of that prepared him for the fear gripping him now. He grabbed a towel and placed it under his mom's head, hoping it would help somehow. Then he ran to the kitchen sink, filled a bottle with water, and brought it back to dab her lips. "Mom, please wake up," he pleaded softly, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You gotta be okay. You and the baby. You both have to make it." But deep down, Marcus knew he couldn't do this alone. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, and the silence in the room was deafening. That's when he heard it, a faint sound coming from outside the apartment. At first he thought it might just be the wind or cars passing by on the street. But then he realized it wasn't random noise. It was someone talking, and they sounded worried. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, an elderly neighbor who lived 2 doors down, had overheard parts of his frantic cries through the thin walls separating their apartments. Evelyn was known in the building as a quiet, reserved woman who kept mostly to herself. She rarely interacted with the Johnsons, partly because of the invisible barriers created by years of racial tension in the neighborhood. But tonight, something inside her stirred. Evelyn hesitated, at first unsure if she should get involved. After all, it wasn't her business, was it? What if she misunderstood what she'd heard? But as the muffled sobs continued, her conscience wouldn't let her ignore it. Putting on her slippers, she grabbed her cane and slowly made her way to the Johnsons' door. When she knocked, there was no answer. Worried, she pushed the door open slightly and peeked inside. The sight that greeted her broke her heart. There was Marcus, barely a teenager, kneeling beside his unconscious mother, trying desperately to keep her stable. His face was streaked with tears, and his small frame shook with exhaustion and fear. "Oh my goodness," Evelyn gasped, stepping inside. "What's happening here?" Marcus looked up, startled by the intrusion. For a moment, he didn't know whether to feel relieved or defensive. "My mom, she's sick," he managed to choke out. "I called 911, but they didn't send anyone." Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. Without wasting another second, she moved closer, setting her cane aside. "Let me call them again," she said firmly. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll figure this out together." As Evelyn dialed 911 from her own phone, Marcus watched her with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Why was this woman helping him? They weren't friends. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time they'd even spoken. Yet here she was, stepping in when no one else had. This time, the operator on the line was different. A young man named Jake listened carefully as Evelyn explained the situation, emphasizing the urgency of the case. Within minutes, he assured her that paramedics were on their way. While they waited, Evelyn stayed by Marcus's side, offering words of comfort and practical advice. She held Sarah's hand, speaking softly to her, as though willing her to hold on. For the first time in years, the invisible wall between their families began to crumble. In that tiny, dimly lit apartment, two strangers found themselves united by a shared determination to save a life, and perhaps rebuild a fractured community along the way. The sound of distant sirens cut through the tense silence, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus's heart leapt at the noise, but his mind was still clouded with doubt. Would they really come? Or would this turn out to be another false hope? He glanced at Mrs. Carter, who gave him a reassuring nod. "They're coming, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Just hold on a little longer." When the paramedics finally burst through the door, their presence brought both relief and chaos. The small apartment filled with urgent voices and hurried movements as the team assessed Sarah's condition. One of them knelt beside her, checking her pulse and breathing, while another asked rapid-fire questions. "How long has she been unconscious? Is she having contractions? Does she have any medical history we should know about?" Marcus struggled to answer, his words tumbling over each other in his haste. Evelyn stepped in, her calm demeanor cutting through the confusion. "She collapsed suddenly," she explained. "Her son called 911 earlier, but no one came until now. She's 7 months pregnant, and I think there's something seriously wrong." The paramedics exchanged grim looks. They worked quickly, attaching monitors to Sarah and preparing an saline. As they stabilized her enough to move her onto a stretcher, one of them turned to Marcus. "You did good, kid," he said, giving him a small smile. "Staying calm and taking care of your mom like that, it took guts." Marcus nodded, though his legs felt weak beneath him. For the first time since the nightmare began, he allowed himself to breathe. But even as the paramedics carried Sarah out of the apartment, her frail figure strapped securely to the stretcher, Marcus couldn't shake the fear gripping his chest. What if it was too late? What if after everything he'd failed? Evelyn seemed to sense his turmoil. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Come on," she said. "We'll follow them to the hospital. You don't have to face this alone." Those simple words meant more to Marcus than she could possibly understand. In that moment, he realized how much he needed someone, anyone, to stand by him. On the drive to the hospital, Evelyn kept talking, filling the silence with stories from her own life. She told Marcus about her late husband, who had always believed in helping others, and how proud he would have been of what she was doing tonight. Her words were soothing, almost like a balm for Marcus's frayed nerves. Slowly, he began to relax, finding comfort in her kindness. At the hospital, the waiting room became a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed conversations. Nurses rushed past them. Doctors conferred in low tones and machines beeped rhythmically in the background. Marcus sat slumped in a chair, clutching his knees tightly, while Evelyn stayed close, offering quiet support. Every so often she patted his hand or handed him a tissue when fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. Hours passed before a doctor finally emerged, his expression unreadable. Marcus shot to his feet, his heart hammering once again. "Is my mom okay?" he blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. The doctor smiled faintly, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "Your mother is stable," the doctor said. "She experienced a severe case of preeclampsia, which can be dangerous for both her and the baby. But thanks to quick action and your bravery, we were able to intervene in time. Both she and the baby are going to be fine." Relief washed over Marcus like a tidal wave, leaving him dizzy and weak. He sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands as sobs of gratitude overwhelmed him. Evelyn wrapped an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "See?" she murmured. "You saved her. You truly are a hero." In that moment, surrounded by strangers turned allies and buoyed by the promise of recovery, Marcus felt a glimmer of light pierce through the darkness. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in hours, he dared to believe that things might just turn out all right, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that this night would change not only his life but also the lives of those around him, forever. The hospital buzzed with activity as word of Sarah Johnson's miraculous recovery spread among the staff. Nurses whispered to each other in hushed tones about the young boy who had refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Doctors marveled at how close they had come to losing both mother and child, and how Marcus's determination had played a crucial role in saving them. The story was too extraordinary to stay confined within the hospital walls. By morning, local news outlets had caught wind of what happened. Reporters flocked to the scene, eager to piece together the events of that harrowing night. They interviewed paramedics, hospital staff, and even Evelyn Carter, whose unexpected involvement added a poignant twist to the narrative. But it was the audio recording of Marcus's initial 911 call that sparked outrage and brought the story to national attention. When journalists obtained the chilling transcript, it painted a devastating picture. Linda Harper's dismissive tone and racially charged remarks left little room for interpretation. "You're probably just overreacting," she had said before hanging up on Marcus. Those words echoed across television screens and social media platforms, igniting a firestorm of anger and disbelief. How could someone entrusted with saving lives act with such blatant disregard? Marcus listened to snippets of the backlash from his mom's hospital room, where he sat holding her hand. Sarah was still weak, but conscious now, her color gradually returning as she recovered. Though grateful for the outpouring of support, Marcus felt uneasy about being thrust into the spotlight. He wasn't used to people praising him or calling him brave. He was just a kid who had done what he thought was right. Evelyn, sitting beside him, noticed his discomfort. "You don't have to carry this alone, Marcus," she said gently. "People are angry because they see how unfair this is. It's not just about you. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." As the days passed, the story gained momentum. Community leaders held press conferences demanding accountability. From the city's emergency services department, protesters gathered outside the 911 call center, holding signs that read, "Every life matters," and "Justice for Marcus and his mom." Even strangers reached out to the Johnson family, sending messages of encouragement and donations to help with medical bills. Amid the chaos, Marcus began to realize the weight of what had happened. This wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt ignored or dismissed because of their race, age, or background. And while he didn't ask for the responsibility, he understood that his voice mattered now more than ever. One afternoon, a reporter visited the hospital hoping to speak with him. At first, Marcus hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the nightmare publicly. But Sarah, Her voice, soft but firm, encouraged him. "Tell them your truth, baby," she said. "If sharing our story helps even one person, then it's worth it." With Evelyn by his side, Marcus agreed to an interview. Sitting in front of the camera, he spoke haltingly at first, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. But as he recounted the fear, frustration, and eventual triumph of that night, his confidence grew. He talked about how scared he'd been, how hard he'd fought to save his mom, and how much it hurt to know that someone hadn't believed him simply because of where he lived and the color of his skin. His words resonated deeply with viewers. Here was a child, a boy barely old enough to tie his own shoelaces, who had faced unimaginable adversity with courage and resilience. People were moved not only by his strength but also by the stark reminder of the systemic issues plaguing society. Marcus's story became a catalyst for change, shining a light on the cracks in the system that desperately needed repair. By the time the interview aired, the entire nation was watching. Calls for justice grew louder, petitions demanding reform flooded online platforms, and community organizations rallied together to push for policy changes. What started as a single desperate plea for help had transformed into a movement, one that promised to challenge prejudice and demand better for everyone. For Marcus, the newfound attention was overwhelming, but it also gave him hope. If his voice could inspire others to speak up, then maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of all the pain. As he looked at his mom, sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, he allowed himself to believe that their fight was far from over, and that they weren't alone anymore. The pressure on the city's emergency services department reached a boiling point as Marcus's story dominated headlines across the country. Protesters gathered daily outside the 911 call center, chanting slogans and holding up signs that demanded justice. Social media campaigns gained traction with hashtags like "Believe Our Kids" and "Fix the System" trending for weeks. The public outrage was impossible to ignore, and officials scrambled to address the growing crisis. Linda Harper, the operator who had dismissed Marcus's call, found herself at the center of the storm. Audio recordings of her dismissive remarks were played repeatedly in news segments, dissected by commentators, and condemned by advocates for accountability. Her actions became a symbol of everything wrong with systemic neglect and racial bias in emergency response systems. Facing mounting evidence and public fury, the department had no choice but to act swiftly. An internal investigation was launched, scrutinizing not only Linda's conduct, but also the broader practices within the 911 system. Investigators uncovered troubling patterns. Calls from predominantly black neighborhoods were often deprioritized or mishandled compared to those from wealthier, predominantly white areas. Training protocols lacked emphasis on cultural sensitivity, leaving operators ill-equipped to handle emergencies without implicit biases influencing their decisions. These revelations sent shockwaves through the community and forced leaders to confront uncomfortable truths about institutional racism. For Linda, the consequences were swift and severe. She was suspended without pay pending the outcome of the investigation. But when details of her behavior came to light, her history of curt responses, documented complaints from previous callers, and derogatory comments made during training sessions, it became clear that suspension wouldn't be enough. Ultimately, she was fired and faced criminal charges for dereliction of duty. While some argued that this punishment was too harsh, others insisted it was necessary to send a message. No one is above accountability, not even those tasked with saving lives. In response to the scandal, sweeping reforms were implemented across the Emergency Services Department. New training programs focused on eliminating bias, improving communication skills, and ensuring every caller received equal treatment, regardless of race, age, or location. Supervisors were required to monitor calls more closely, and additional resources were allocated to underserved communities. The changes marked a turning point, though many acknowledged there was still much work to be done. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to navigate his newfound role as an accidental advocate. Invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and even government offices asking him to share his story. Though hesitant at first, he agreed to speak at a town hall meeting organized by local leaders. Standing before a packed auditorium, he shared his experience with raw honesty, describing the fear he felt when his cries for help went unanswered and the determination that kept him going, despite the odds. His speech left the audience in tears and inspired action. Parents hugged their children tighter as they left the venue, vowing to teach them resilience. Activists renewed their push for policy changes, using Marcus's story as a rallying cry. Even skeptics couldn't deny the power of his words. Here was a child whose courage had exposed flaws in a system designed to protect everyone equally. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus began to see glimpses of progress. Calls for reform extended beyond his hometown, sparking discussions in other cities grappling with similar issues. Community members started organizing workshops to educate people about recognizing bias and advocating for change. Slowly but surely, the tide was shifting. Though Marcus never sought fame or recognition, he realized that his voice carried weight now. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every person who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or underestimated because of prejudice. And while the journey ahead would be long and challenging, he took solace in knowing that his bravery had ignited something bigger than he could have imagined. A movement toward justice, equality, and hope. The ripple effects of Marcus's bravery continued to spread far beyond his small neighborhood. His story resonated deeply with people from all walks of life, transcending age, race, and background. Community leaders, activists, and even politicians began reaching out to him, eager to amplify his message and turn his experience into a catalyst for lasting change. Though Marcus never imagined himself as a public figure, he soon found himself at the forefront of a growing movement. At first, speaking in front of large crowds terrified him. The thought of standing on a stage or sitting under bright lights for an interview made his palms sweat and his stomach churn. But every time he hesitated, his mom would remind him why it mattered. "You're not just fighting for us, baby," Sarah would say, her voice filled with pride. "You're fighting for everyone who feels invisible. Don't let them silence you now." With Evelyn by his side, Marcus slowly gained confidence. She became more than just a neighbor. She was his mentor, his cheerleader, and sometimes even his protector when reporters got too pushy. Together, they attended rallies, town halls, and school assemblies, sharing their story and urging others to take action. Evelyn often spoke about how Marcus had inspired her to step outside her comfort zone, reminding audiences that it's never too late to make a difference. One of the most impactful moments came when Marcus addressed a group of lawmakers during a special hearing on emergency response reform. Standing behind a podium, his slight frame dwarfed by the towering figures around him, he spoke with a maturity that belied his young age. "When I called 911, I didn't expect to be ignored," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "I didn't expect someone to hang up on me because of where I live or what I look like. All I wanted was help, for my mom, for my little sister who wasn't born yet. That's all anyone should have to ask for." His words struck a chord with the room, leaving many lawmakers visibly moved. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded solemnly, promising to push for meaningful legislation. By the end of the session, several new bills were introduced aimed at improving accountability within emergency services, increasing funding for underserved communities, and implementing stricter anti-bias training for operators. But Marcus's influence extended beyond policy changes. His courage inspired countless individuals to speak up about their own experiences with neglect or discrimination. People shared stories of being turned away from hospitals, ignored by police officers, or dismissed by government agencies, simply because of their race or socioeconomic status. These testimonies added fuel to the fire, creating a groundswell of support for systemic reform. Back home, Marcus noticed subtle but significant shifts in his community. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted him warmly, thanking him for standing up when no one else would. Kids at school looked up to him as a hero, asking questions about how he stayed brave during such a scary moment. Even Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who had initially been wary of getting involved, became a regular presence in the Johnson household, bringing homemade meals and offering words of encouragement. As weeks turned into months, Marcus began to embrace his role as a symbol of resilience and hope. He started mentoring younger children, teaching them the importance of believing in themselves and standing up for what's right. He also worked closely with local organizations to create workshops focused on leadership and advocacy, ensuring that future generations would know how to navigate challenges with strength and grace. Though Marcus understood that true equality wouldn't happen overnight, he allowed himself to feel optimistic about the progress being made. Every speech he gave, every hand he shook, and every life he touched reminded him that his voice mattered, and that together, people could build a better world. It was a heavy responsibility, but one he carried with quiet determination. By the time Sarah gave birth to Hope, a healthy baby girl named after the light she brought into their lives, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Holding his baby sister for the first time, he whispered softly, "We're gonna make things better. For you, little one, I promise." And deep down he believed it. The bond between Marcus, Sarah, and Evelyn grew stronger with each passing day, transforming their lives in ways none of them could have predicted. What had started as a chance encounter born out of desperation had blossomed into a deep and lasting connection. Evelyn, once a distant neighbor, became an integral part of the Johnson family, a grandmother figure who filled a void left by Marcus's late grandparents. Her presence brought warmth and stability to their home, while her unwavering support gave Marcus the courage to keep pushing forward. Evelyn often joked that she had gained not just one grandchild, but two, Marcus and baby Hope. She doted on the infant endlessly, knitting tiny sweaters and singing lullabies that had been passed down through her own family for generations. For Marcus, watching Evelyn cradle his little sister was both heartwarming and humbling. It reminded him how far they'd come since that terrifying night, and how much love had grown from such pain. Their newfound unity wasn't limited to their household. It rippled through the entire neighborhood. The scandal surrounding Linda Harper and the subsequent reforms sparked difficult but necessary conversations about race, privilege, and accountability. People who had long avoided discussing these issues were now gathering at community meetings, sharing their thoughts and fears openly. Slowly, walls began to crumble, not just between neighbors but within themselves. One evening, Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside his apartment building, watching as kids played basketball under flickering streetlights. A group of parents sat nearby, laughing and chatting as they supervised their children. Just months ago, this scene would have been unimaginable. Racial tensions had kept many families divided, with mistrust simmering beneath the surface. But now there was a sense of camaraderie, a shared commitment to healing old wounds and building something stronger together. Mrs. Thompson, a woman who had lived across the hall for years but rarely spoke to anyone, approached Marcus with a shy smile. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "You've done so much for all of us. You've given us hope." Marcus felt his cheeks flush. He still wasn't used to being thanked, especially by adults, who seemed so much wiser than him. "I didn't do it alone," he replied honestly. "We all helped each other, that's what matters." Word spread quickly about the changes happening in the neighborhood. Local businesses began sponsoring events aimed at fostering unity. A block party here, a charity drive there. Kids organized cleanup days, painting murals over graffiti-covered walls and planting flowers along the sidewalks. Even the city took notice, allocating funds to repair broken streetlights and fix potholes that had plagued the area for years. Amid all the progress, Marcus found joy in simple moments. He loved sitting on the porch with Evelyn, sipping lemonade, and watching Hope giggle as she tried to grab at passing butterflies. He cherished the quiet evenings spent helping his mom cook dinner, their laughter filling the kitchen as they experimented with new recipes. And he treasured the letters he received from people across the country, thanking him for inspiring them to stand up against injustice. But perhaps the most profound change was within Marcus himself, the shy, uncertain boy who had once struggled to find his place in the world was now confident and self-assured. He understood that bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing the right thing even when you were scared. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. As autumn leaves began to fall, painting the streets in hues of orange and gold, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. Together they had turned tragedy into triumph, proving that even in the darkest moments light could shine through. And as he held baby Hope close, marveling at her tiny fingers wrapped around his, Marcus whispered softly, "This is just the beginning." Years passed and Marcus grew into a young man whose courage continued to inspire those around him. Though life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, the scars of that fateful night remained etched in his memory, not as reminders of fear, but as symbols of resilience. He often thought about how one moment of desperation had sparked a chain reaction, bringing people together and igniting change far beyond what he ever imagined. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus stood at a podium in front of a large crowd gathered in the town square. Behind him loomed a striking bronze statue, a boy holding a phone, his face determined yet vulnerable. The monument was unveiled that day, dedicated to all those who had suffered neglect or injustice at the hands of systems meant to protect them. It was called The Voice That Changed Us, a tribute not just to Marcus but to every person brave enough to speak up when no one else would listen. As Marcus gazed out at the sea of faces, he felt a surge of emotion. There were neighbors from his old apartment building, teachers who had supported him through school, activists he'd worked alongside, and even strangers who had traveled from other cities to be part of the event. Among them stood Evelyn, her silver hair catching the sunlight, and Sarah cradling baby Hope, who was now a lively 7-year-old with her father's curiosity and her mother's smile. Marcus took a deep breath before beginning his speech. "When I was 12 years old, I didn't think my voice mattered," he began, his tone steady but heartfelt. "I thought I was too small, too young, too powerless to make a difference. But then something happened that taught me otherwise. When we stand up for what's right, even if we're scared, even if it feels like no one is listening, we can create ripples that turn into waves." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This statue isn't just about me. It's about every kid who's been told they're too little to understand, every parent who's been dismissed because of where they live, every family who's been ignored because of the color of their skin. This is for all of you, for everyone who has ever felt invisible." The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Marcus smiled faintly, glancing back at the statue. Its presence served as a powerful reminder of how far they'd come and how much work still lay ahead. While reforms had improved emergency services and brought greater accountability, systemic racism and inequality persisted. But Marcus knew progress wasn't measured by perfection. It was measured by persistence. After the ceremony, Marcus wandered through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting hugs from well-wishers. A group of teenagers approached him, their eyes wide with admiration. "How did you stay so strong?" one of them asked shyly. Marcus chuckled softly. "I wasn't strong," he admitted. "I was scared, really scared. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep going anyway." Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate the occasion, Marcus found himself sitting on a bench beside Evelyn. They watched silently, as bursts of color illuminated the horizon, reflecting off the faces of children laughing nearby. "You know," Evelyn said after a while, her voice warm with pride, "you've changed this town more than you realize." Marcus shook his head modestly. "We all did it together," he replied. "None of this would have happened without people like you, people willing to step in when it mattered most." Evelyn patted his hand affectionately. "Maybe. But someone had to start it. And that someone was you." As the night drew to a close, Marcus looked around at the vibrant community surrounding him. The neighborhood that once seemed fractured and forgotten now pulsed with life and hope. Kids played freely. Under repaired streetlights, families shared meals on porches and friendships blossomed across lines that once divided them. It wasn't perfect, but it was proof that change was possible. That night, as Marcus tucked Hope into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy says you're a hero," she murmured. Marcus chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm just a regular person, sweetheart," he whispered. "But if standing up for what's right makes me a hero, then maybe we all can be heroes." With those words, Marcus turned off the light, leaving Hope's room bathed in soft moonlight. As he closed the door behind him, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead would always have challenges, but he believed in the power of unity, compassion, and courage. Together, they had transformed pain into purpose, and in doing so, they had created a legacy of hope that would endure for generations to come.